I'm Shanna Martin, host of the Tech Tools for Teachers podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Dr. Lindsay Whorton. Lindsay is a founding member and the president of the Holdsworth Center. The Holdsworth Center supports aspiring leaders in their leadership journey. She is the author of the book, A New School Leadership Architecture, a 4-level framework for reimagining roles. What an incredible book. What an awesome conversation. So much to learn and think about. Thanks for joining us. And oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you helped out the podcast. How could you do that, you ask? Glad you asked that question. Here are 3 ways. 1, you could tell a friend and share the links. 2, you could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And 3, you could click on the link on my website homepage to buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 to help me, address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That would be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Dr. Lindsay Whorton is proud to be a founding member of the Holdsworth Center. She helped design the center's programming and has served as president since 2019. Under Lindsay's leadership, Holdsworth has grown from serving 7 public school districts through its initial offering, the Holdsworth Partnership, to serving more than 1,900 leaders in 89 public school districts across several programs, all designed to build a bench of stronger superintendents and principals for Texas public schools. Lindsay's story with Holdsworth began in 2015 when Charles Butt, chairman of HEB, tapped her to work with an organizing board designing the center's first programs. At the time, Lindsay was working as a consultant with the Boston Consulting Group, or BCG, in Washington, D.C. She officially joined the Holdsworth Center team shortly after its launch in January 2017. In her role as managing director of district support, Lindsay helped create and evolve Holdsworth's model for supporting partner districts to develop aspiring leaders, place them in leadership roles, and support them as they progress along their leadership journey. Lindsay's dive into education research began in 2009 when she was named a Rhodes Scholar and went on to earn a master's degree in comparative social policy and a doctorate in social policy from Oxford University. During her time at Oxford, Lindsay spent a year at the University of Helsinki, where she was a Fulbright Scholar. She visited schools and classrooms to understand Finland's world-renowned teacher education system. In 2016, Routledge published her book, Teachers' Unions and Education Reform in Comparative Context, which examined the impact of teachers' unions on performance-related pay reform in Finland, Switzerland, Texas, and Florida. A native of Independence, Missouri, Lindsay earned a bachelor's degree in secondary education and English from Drake University in Iowa, where she served as a captain of the women's basketball team. Lindsay helped lead the underdog team to a Cinderella finish in 2007 by winning the Missouri Valley Conference Tournament Championship and was named the tournament's outstanding player and a first-team academic All-American. Our focus today is Lindsay's new book, A New School Leadership Architecture, a 4-level framework for reimagining roles. Lindsay, welcome to the podcast. Say hi to everyone.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
So awesome, Lindsay. Tell us about the Holdsworth Center. What's its purpose?
So the Holdsworth Center is a nonprofit based in Texas that was created in 2017 with the mission of supporting public schools to serve all of the 5.5 million kids in Texas well. And the way that we do that is we're really focused on people. How do you equip superintendents, principals, teachers to be great leaders for their students? And so as you mentioned in the intro, there's a lot, it's a big state, a lot of work to do. And we've been working hard to be able to support so many of the great leaders in our classroom, schools, and districts across the state since our founding.
That's awesome. And I got to tell you, I grew up in Florida. I've lived in Georgia for 39 years. But at one time in my life, I went to school in New Mexico. And to get to New Mexico, I had to cross this giant place called Texas. And I'm amazed at how different areas are in the state of Texas, because one side is big, wide open, lots of desert-type climate, and you get all the way over into the eastern side, and there's a lot more greenery around every place. That's also got to mean that the school systems are very different in their makeup and their from people to just the land and area and the needs. I mean, how does that impact what you do?
Yeah. I am not from Texas, and so when I moved here, 8 years ago, started working for Holdsworth 10 years ago, had to wrap my mind around that very thing, which is how big and diverse the state is. And I think it is one of the things that is most extraordinary about Texas. And one of my first jobs, we work with districts now in almost every corner of the state. And one of my first jobs, I would be in Dallas 1 minute, in a rural area outside of Houston, and in the Rio Grande Valley in a week. And what stood out to me is just the richness of the culture and the backgrounds and how unique those communities are. And so on one level, I think, but at the same time, the goal is the same. And a lot of times the challenges, are pretty similar. A lot of districts across the state are trying to figure out how do you recruit, attract, develop, and retain great teachers. That's one of their most important challenges. The way you do that has to be adapted to your local context. And so we work really hard to be responsive to the needs of the districts and schools that we work with. And frankly, that is the big leadership task, is to figure out how do I tackle this challenge, or how do I realize this opportunity in this community in ways that respond to the needs of the people here. So it's a wonderful challenge and like a beautiful thing about Texas.
It's very cool because I had several years of that experience, and it was very, very diverse and unique. And one of the things that goes with that, a bunch of years later in my profession when I was a high school principal, the system I worked for sent me out to the University of Texas, El Paso, so UTEP. Yep. Went out there for a teacher job fair, and I was like the newest display at the local zoo or something like this, because everyone was like, Marietta, Georgia, what are you doing here? and quite simply, we're trying to steal teachers from that area of the world to come to Georgia. But I'll never forget, as like everyone had come visit the guy from Marietta, Georgia. So it's like,
yeah.
So moving on, but good stuff. All right, so our focus today is your new book, A New School Leadership Architecture, a 4-level framework for reimagining roles. What inspired you to write this book?
So when I started, I thought I was writing a book about how to help education leaders understand when they transitioned from one leadership role to the next, how to level up their leadership. So an example, of that is, when an excellent classroom teacher moves for the first time into a role coaching, supporting, developing other adults, it's a pretty profound transition. And it can sometimes catch people by surprise. So how do we help people see and navigate those transitions? So that's what I thought I was trying to do. And that's still a part of what the book is about. But as I was working on it, I'll never forget, I had this moment of realization where I realized that there was a risk. And I think being a leadership development organization, you run the risk of accidentally sending the following message, which is if everybody just worked harder and was better at their jobs, that everything would be fine. And I had this realization when I was thinking about, these different leadership levels and these transitions, that part of why leadership is so hard is because of the way that it is structured in our schools and in our districts, and the way in which we have sometimes just piled higher and higher and more complex expectations on the people in our schools without thinking about how we provide them with the time and with the support to tackle them. So that was a big transition point where I said this book actually has to have two things in it. It has to be about what would it look like to structure leadership in a way that's more doable for the talented, committed people in those jobs. And then how do we keep the part about helping them diagnose like what the shifts are that they need to make and how they can level up their skills. So that was really the inspiration for the book, is trying to be of service to the hardworking people who are dedicating so much of their time, energy, effort, passion for our students every day and have really, really hard jobs.
Very cool. So I have to ask this question, which goes with that, because as you were adjusting what you're going to focus on, what helped to make it so that it went from an idea to actually being a finished book to talk to everybody about?
Well, it was a 3-year plus process. There are lots of people who can write books faster than me. But some of it was recognizing that, as we've worked with schools and districts, we actually have examples that we can point to of people who have taken this challenge on. And so then it became a process of both, how do we frame this in a way that makes it really easy for busy, smart people to see opportunities in how they do their jobs? And then how do we draw on some of the great things and the innovative things that are happening in schools? But that was a multi-year effort to both refine the ideas and then try to figure out how to present them in a way that would be easy for folks to kind of internalize and use.
Love it. It's awesome. All right. So glad you finished it and glad it is out there. So in recent years, the number of teachers leaving public education has continued to grow. Would you agree or disagree with this statement? One of the challenges that new teachers face is that they are underprepared for working in classrooms.
I would agree, and I hope you'll let me share why I think so.
Most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, some of this is just about the composition of what's happening with the teaching profession. So that's one reason that I agree. And, nationally, if you look at the data, the percentage of inexperienced and novice teachers, and I think that the distinction between those is novices are going to be first and second year teachers and experienced is going to be a little bit longer than that. Those are going up across the country. And the percentage of teachers who are teaching without a credential, continues to increase. So I think that's a data point that says we are seeing more and more folks enter the profession without, the level of training, support, and development that you might have expected, 10 or 20 years ago. And Texas is the state I know best, and a place where you can see those patterns playing out in an even more extreme way. And I think probably predicts where the nation, is heading. In Texas, you've had, attrition, folks leaving the profession, spike from 10 to about 13.5%, which can sound small, but in a state as big as Texas, that's 10,000 additional vacancies that school districts are trying to fill every year. And we know that the interest in the teaching profession has been stagnant or declining, not just recently, but going all the way back to 2009, the big housing crisis and recession. And so school districts are trying to fill vacancies at a time where there just are not as many of the candidates that you would have been looking for at job fairs, 5 or 10 years ago. And so the outcome of that are those 10,000 vacancies, and that number is going to vary a little bit each year, are increasingly filled with folks who are uncertified and minimally prepared. So the estimates vary a little bit, but range between 40 to 52% of those new teachers are coming in with limited training and development. And we know that those most inexperienced, least developed candidates tend to be concentrated in our highest need schools, the schools with the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged students and the students who are furthest from opportunity. And that isn't to say that those folks don't have the potential to be great teachers, but it means that we're going to have to really wrap those candidates with a different kind of support to give them, the coaching, the development, the encouragement that they're going to need to develop. So I think that's one factor. And I think the other is just, even if you go back to whatever we think the golden era was of teacher development, most folks would say, yeah, I had a lot of training, but when I entered the classroom, there was still so much, that I wasn't fully prepared to encounter. So I think in that sense, this isn't entirely new. Teaching is just an extremely complex science and art. And I don't think anybody arrives at day one with all the tools in their toolkit that they need to serve students well.
It is interesting when you think about the numbers and with experience and so forth versus the numbers that are just, there is no experience and they're coming in. And one of the things that a lot of colleagues will talk about now is a questions coming from new teachers about, or people who want to have that first job as a teacher and such, about what their hours are. And I say this not in jest, except that it's one of those things that as a teacher, it's sometimes your hours are very much expanded. Talking about a teacher in a classroom, from grading papers to developing lessons to being accessible to the kids. On top of that, being able to participate in school activities or be the sponsor or coach or, play some other role in the school. And why I bring this up is it shows really kind of a misunderstanding of, because those other areas are so important, because that's how you really connect with the kids and help them go about achieving what it is they're trying to achieve in the school. So with that being said, what type of support do you think teachers are missing? I mean, what should be there? What can we do about it?
Well, I actually think this starts with a mantra that you'll hear occasionally. And I think this is actually the big shift. And I want to be really careful about describing it, which is there's been this long mantra about teachers closing their door and teaching. And I think, there's two different things going on there. I think one is this vision of the profession that we've had for a long time as an independent practice of the art and science of teaching. And there's been a lot of pride in that. And I don't want to take away from that pride. And I think the other thing that sometimes is going on with that comment is teachers trying to shut their door against whatever they view as the unproductive, mandates, directions, et cetera. But I think I think we have to start there, because I think my view is, I think we have to make a shift. And I think that shift starts by recognizing that teaching is extraordinarily complex. And this is coming from having a high view of what professionals are doing. And if teaching is extraordinarily complex, we shouldn't expect an individual to have to, on their own, in isolation, figure everything out. And we need to embrace that if this is really complex, we should lean in to collaborating with our colleagues, benefiting from their ideas and feedback, having the opportunity to get advice and coaching and feedback on how we can improve our practice, not just when we're brand new, and maybe the most experienced, maybe limited, but that all of us have opportunities to continue to deepen our practice, given how hard this work is and how complex it is. And so I think that we've got to start by shifting, that mindset, and then saying, what would it look like for teachers to have access to a thought partner, to an encourager, to a coach, to a mentor, to someone who can support them in solving whatever that next challenge in their practice is. So that would be the core to me, is like teachers can't feel like they're on their own up against this big challenge, that they have to figure everything out themselves, and they should have access to really high quality, trustworthy coaching support and advice throughout their careers.
It's so important, because yes, there was electricity when I started teaching, and yes, there was, there was air to breathe and all kinds of stuff like that. But, but what there wasn't when I started teaching was there wasn't email, and there weren't computers yet. And, they were big giant things in other buildings and other places in the school system. I received my first job. I pretty much was hired. I was hired in the middle of the year, because if I'd only told them I could coach soccer, I probably would have had that job earlier. I start at Thanksgiving time, and I go into the classroom. I get introduced to the students before Thanksgiving. After the break, they come back, and I'm there. Ta-da! They'd met me right before the break, and then we go about our business. And I pretty much was, you're hired. This is what we do. Here's the curriculum that we need you to follow. These are the things that you're doing. This is kind of where she left off, the person you're replacing, and good luck. And that was my... And my support was, I can't shortcut the department chair, who she touched base with me from time to time and helped me. But my real support was the lunchroom. There were, at the time I took my lunch, it was a limited choice of what teachers were there. And they were fun to have, as because they were an interesting crew. There were two of them. But that was my little network that I created to be able to help me figure out what I need to do. And this is, me as a brand new teacher in the middle of a year. And it's grown a lot since then, but I think there's still some aspects of that's out there, which is...
And teaching has only gotten harder, right? That what we expect teachers to do and to accomplish has only gotten harder. And so if your only resource are those folks you can access at lunchtime, you're probably going to be left feeling like you've got a lot more things on your list.
Right. And just as a note, one of those teachers was a veteran science teacher who he was a hoot and had lots of great ideas too. Don't get me wrong. And then the other one was we were a center for hearing impaired students. And so the other one was a signing teacher. He was one who did all the signing, and I got to know him well because he was in lots of my classes with kids. And so I learned a lot from them, and if nothing else, because they both had great personalities and outlooks on the world, it helped deal with when the days were not going well. But I think it's such a fascinating thing because we think about how complicated it is, and that's why I mentioned that I didn't have email or computers yet. Because I think sometimes if I only could have taken YouTube back in those days with me, if that would have worked. There's some cool. I taught history, and it's like. There's so many cool things that I could have made happen. But with all that stuff that we have today, it's complicated.
Yeah.
So good stuff. All right. Could you talk about the amount of time that U.S. teachers spend in the classroom versus other countries and why this matters?
Yeah. So my background's in international education, and I find that as soon as you start talking about other countries, just the defenses just come up. So I'll name that, we can't learn from them. It's so different. But I think looking at other nations is helpful, not to say we can or we should do things exactly as they do. Because obviously it's like your question about Texas. There's so many differences and you can't just pick something up and plop it down. But sometimes looking at others can give us a bit of a mirror to say, like, what do we notice about ourselves? And what does that make us think about our practice? I'll start with Singapore. So in Singapore, a teacher delivers instruction. So that's the time that they are with students, delivering lessons and or supporting students in their learning in some other way for 17 hours a week. And that is compared to 27 hours for U.S. teachers. And brand new teachers in Singapore teach even less than 17 hours. And their expert, kind of excellent teachers also teach even less because they are coaching, supporting, developing the new teachers. Most people's reaction to that fact is probably, oh, Lindsay, get out of here. That's just Singapore. It's a bad example. We can't learn anything from them. Really small island nation, not like us. But if you look globally, the average, and this is based on OECD data, is that teachers around the world deliver 19 hours of instruction per week. So a few more hours, but we are the outlier on this in terms of the number of lesson hours that we're asking teachers to deliver, and frankly, the resulting very small percentage of their time that they have to do everything else. So that math roughly translates into around the world, teachers deliver 700 hours of instructions, and in the US, it's 950 hours. So that's 250 hours over the course of the year that teachers in the US don't have to plan, to collaborate, to work with their colleagues, to engage in professional learning. And it's time that our best teachers don't have to be leading, coaching, supporting, and mentoring their colleagues. So, I think this is hugely significant, both to how teachers experience their job and the demands that are placed on them, their opportunities for development, their opportunities for leadership and career growth. But it's also, frankly, and we'll probably talk more about this, part of why so much of the leadership work lives with the principal, because we just don't give teachers the time that they would need to participate and lead more of that work from the classroom. So I think it's hugely significant to teachers' experience of their jobs.
Oh, that's so powerful. If they do 17 hours in Singapore and we do 27 hours in the U.S., are the kids somewhere else?
How do you get to those numbers? Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's going to be a combination. And this week it's been 3 hours on this. It's going to be a combination of some different priorities, levers, decisions that you're making. And this is where, everybody's mix is going to be a little bit different. One factor is the number of hours that students are actually engaged in instruction. That number looks different around the world, and there's a choice, to make there. Another question may be the length of your school year, how you design that. And there are some U.S. examples that give teachers a lot more time during the week, and they flex on things like longer school year. The other factors, and all of these are hard choices, but then you get into how many teachers do you employ? That's a choice, that can dial up or dial down, that opportunity you have in your schedule. And class sizes comes in here as well, which I know is like one of the hottest, most greatly contested kind of policy questions. But Andreas Schleicher, who's the head of the OECD, would make the general argument that a lot of school systems around the world have chosen to have slightly bigger class sizes in exchange for giving teachers more time. And so that's another example, of the levers and the trade-offs. So it's a mixture, of those things. But I think it all comes back to, budgets reflect priorities, how we spend our time, how we allocate our people has to reflect what we think our most important priority is. And I think the question is it a priority for us to give teachers more time to lead, more time to learn? And then if so, we've got to figure out how to move those other dials to make it happen.
I know I had the good fortune of working with a very, very forward-thinking principal who was amazing, and he's just someone who I hold in very high regard. And the more I've learned over the years, as I became a high school principal and stuff, it even struck home how big a deal this was when we did it. So, for example, we had 90 minutes for planning, as opposed to 45 to 50 minutes, and which was a neat thing. And you had expectations of what you were to do during those time frames, which was not having it scripted, but instead, it being about planning and learning and doing the things to make you better. So I can only imagine what it's like where it is designed for those types of conversations. All right, so let's focus on principals for a minute. What happens when principals view themselves as the primary person responsible for teachers' development?
Well, there's some data, it's a little bit old, it's from 2013, that shows that the vast majority of principals do view themselves as the primary person responsible for teachers' development. And I think the challenge that they face when they bring that view to their work is, if you're a principal of a median school district across the country, you've got 25 to 40 teachers on your campus, depending on who you include as a teacher. So if you're the primary person responsible for all those teachers' development, that means you're trying to figure out how to coach, support, encourage, develop 25 to 40 people. And let's layer on, let's say you're on a campus where 50% of those teachers are brand new, and where, a big share of those have pretty minimal development. The amount of hours that you should be spending coaching, supporting, developing those teachers would pretty quickly outstrip the number of hours that you have, in a week or a month. And we all know that that's not the principal's only job, so the math doesn't even work on that question, but there's so much else the principal needs to be doing in terms of, delivering results for the school. So I think it pretty quickly puts principals in positions where they have to make hard choices about what they are not going to do to try to support teachers and improve student learning. I think it's a real dilemma for them.
So I can definitely tell you that from this viewpoint of this principal, that there was the expectation getting into the principal role. That was part of my job, is to figure out how to support, provide direction, and then provide support in order to go that direction. I was at some conference a long time ago where I met a gentleman who was from Texas, he was principal of two campuses that were put together, and it had like 5,000 kids, and they had these two campuses. So he was the principal, and then there were like these, what would have been typically an assistant principal if we're talking in Georgia, but they were like the heads of those two campuses. And it was fascinating listening to that, because I worked in some districts where they were toying with the idea of creating, if you have a principal, then you have someone who's completely in charge, who is in charge of the curriculum, the focus for the teachers and support within that, and trying to find that time for the principal to do those things. So this is near and dear to my heart, this discussion here, except that I wish someone...
Well, I mean, given the work that I do, I don't think it'll be a surprise that my answer is yes. And I think given your experience, I would expect your answer would also be yes. But I mean, and there's research on this, that shows that principals are the second greatest influence on school level influence on student achievement, after the teacher. But also, if you talk to any teacher, they'll tell you that the strengths, the quality, the focus of their principal makes a huge difference in their ability to do their jobs well. I think the piece that we probably can emphasize a little bit more is I think we could put more emphasis on the leadership team, and we could flesh out more what it means for leadership in schools to really be a team sport where you're really sharing, these responsibilities beyond. I mean, most schools have a principal, they've got an instructional leadership team, they're getting input, from others. But what would it really look like to share the leadership responsibilities that often kind of cluster on the principal's desk with more people in the school? I think we've got more of an opportunity to put an emphasis there.
And that's so important because that's like that. Just being able to address some of that where it's not the whole world is on my shoulders type thing, or it's more doable, I would think. So. Yeah. One of the things I had to decide here when I was talking with you, I'm like, I want to talk in this teacher land, but the principal side of me is like, I'm going to some of these questions about the principal. And I gotta tell you, one of the things that you mentioned or is brought up is that the principal's job has changed over the years. So how do you think it's become undoable?
Yeah. Well, and I'm really curious for what your perspective is, and you may have edits and improvements to kind of my high level narrative. I mean, I think my view of this, from 10,000 feet is a lot of people talk about the transition that happened starting in the early 2000s and has been in motion since then to shift from, and I think if you look back far enough in the history of the principalship, we've gone through a lot more kind of chapters of this, but the common public story is we went from principals as building managers, in the 80s and 90s to principals as instructional leaders. And I think it's a positive thing overall, because I think, when we say principals are instructional leaders, what we're saying is principals should be experts in the core work of the school, which is teaching and learning, and they should have the skills and the capabilities and the responsibility and accountability to ensure that across the classrooms in their school, teaching and learning is excellent and is improving. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who agrees that that's a good, vision, of the principal role. I think the challenge is, and this is this is the tendency in almost every industry, is I think what basically happened there is, one, we added new and additional responsibilities that have continued to get more complex, as time has continued, without taking anything off of what the job of the principal was kind of prior to that shift. And so I think I think the second thing that we accidentally did is we sent principals a message that said what it means for you to be the instructional leader is for you to personally be the one who does all of these things, which I think goes back to, is the principal personally responsible for the development of their teachers? And I think that, I don't know that that was the intent as we made that policy shift, but I think that is what so many principals have internalized. And so I think the challenge that creates is the plate of time, of energy, of effort hasn't gotten any bigger, but we have piled more and more and more and more on it without really thinking about how do we expect all of these leadership responsibilities to get done. And can the principal alone do all of these things, or what additional leadership support, leadership team would they need to be able to do this work well?
Yeah, it's so powerful because when you look at this and you look at what we're required to do, because the shift that you're talking about, when I did my doctoral work, I did a dissertation that's historical, and what was interesting was I ran into, which is what drove my professor nuts. I kept finding really cool things that I thought were fascinating, and one of them was the New York Times followed this gentleman who was recruited, he was tired of being a mechanic somewhere in New York. and he found a help wanted ad for somewhere like Nebraska or something like this, that they were looking for principals, and he went out there and applied for it, and they hired him, and because they were getting desperate for principals in this area. And it really lends itself to the conversation that you're just talking about, which is how much it's changed, because he had to stop. He went in with some basic ideas of what he was going to do, and he really was the job that he had was just making sure that the kids got to school, the building didn't burn down, and that it maintained control, and then that they left for the day and people got paid and that type of stuff,
Yeah.
And then you move forward, and as you move forward and you see the places that actually had way more intricate ways of hiring principals and such, but you come forward into these times where they expect you to be the lead learner, the instructional coordinator, the person who's an expert at all this stuff, but also you have to be, you have to deal with the management of parts of the discipline of the building, and you have to deal with the needs of the teachers, and you have to deal with the needs of the community, and there's all kinds of neat little things that go in there. I was just telling a story the other day about, as a principal, one of the things that I discovered was very important was as you connect with parents, is to find time to spend time with parents. Well, that takes more time.
Yeah.
But I discovered it was very important, because there are some parents that if you could spend time with them, they're very helpful in whatever it is they could be, but they need that time to know that you will connect with them. And that's just one aspect of the job that, then that takes away from classrooms, because then I also know that I got to be in the classrooms and so forth. So
Well, and earlier you kind of described this dilemma of, how much we talk about teachers, how much do we talk about principals? And, I would argue, I think this is one of the big mistakes that we make in talking about public education, is we try to deal with these roles or these topics in isolation. And I would argue that they're fundamentally interconnected, and that if teachers are overloaded and undersupported, and principals are stretched far too thin, those are linked problems, because the principal being stretched too thin contributes to not having the time that they need to support, coach, and develop teachers, not having the time that they need to engage parents, engage caregivers, engage the community in ways that will be very positive for the school and for teachers in the school. And so if we need to start connecting the dots between, if you care about teachers, you also have to care about the principal and their job, and how realistic it is, and vice versa.
that is so right on the money. It's so important. And I think it lends itself to some of what you're talking about with, we almost become undoable, because we have to figure out what needs our attention right now. And when you get, for lack of, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, but for lack of interference from on high, meaning the district or something like that, where they've decided to tell you what to do, and then sometimes the principal's role becomes almost like protector of the the teacher's universe, to say, whoa, hey, let's have a meeting about this, and maybe I can delay you from what you're thinking about right here for a little bit, or actually stop. One of my schools, the superintendent met with me when he hired me. He said he was a new superintendent, that system, and he was hired to get all the initiatives that the county had done to its schools under control. And he said, your job is to remove all the extra and focus on this one thing. And we focused on that one thing. But that's it's a whole other thing there. But that aspect of protecting the realm of being able to teach is interesting too.
Yeah.
So, good stuff. All right. So, in your book, A New School Leadership Architecture, you share a 4-level framework for leadership to change what we do in schools. Could you describe the model and explain why this is the focus we should have in our schools?
Yeah. So we've talked about a lot of the kind of key components, in the model. And so the way I try to make this as simple as possible is to say, that we can divide school leadership into 2 big buckets, that have a lot of things in it. The first is the bucket of building people's capacity. And that includes, coaching and developing teachers. It's also how are you growing your assistant principals, all of the individuals in your school. How are you spending time kind of coaching, developing, and helping them grow? Because that is, the critical lever that will influence both what students learn today and how strong the school is in the future. And then the second bucket is what I call deliver results, and that's all of the work that you need to do to set vision, establish priorities, and then establish systems that will support teachers and the leadership team to get results for kids. And ideally, you're able to incorporate most of the initiatives and priorities that you receive from the district, from the state, from others into kind of that work of delivering results. But then I always acknowledge there's this other, bucket of just like there's always other stuff, that has to get done. But the two big things we're trying to figure out is how do we do those really well. The premise of the book is that if you expect the principal to be able to do all of that, it's never going to work. And so what we need to do is not just think about the principal and not just think about teachers, but really look at the leaders across the school and think about how we could distribute and share leadership in a more realistic way. And so the book offers a framework which has 4 levels, so team members are, the classic team member is your excellent teacher whose job and responsibility is to deliver great teaching and learning and facilitate great teaching and learning with students on a day-to-day basis. The book argues that then you probably need a leadership level, which we call team leader, which are people who have time and capacity to focus from a building capacity standpoint on the development, support, and coaching, of those team members, and then have defined kind of responsibilities around delivering results. So how do you help teachers understand, the curriculum? How do you help them make adjustments to their practice? How do you drive professional learning? And then probably the most controversial level in the book is the idea that then there's probably a bridge leader is what the third level is called, particularly in larger schools. There will probably be smaller schools that might have 3 levels where you've got team member, team leaders, and school leader. But in most bigger schools, you likely have a bridge leader who then is responsible for coaching and developing those team leaders and driving a lot of system development and continuous improvement across the school. And then you've got the school leader. And in short, the book doesn't try to say, here's exactly the structure or the model or the roles that you should have. It offers that framework for you to really think about how can we use the people that we have more effectively to share leadership across the school and to accomplish the most important work. And I think it's going to prompt a lot of folks to have to ask, how are we using our assistant principals? How can we leverage the leadership of our assistant principals more effectively? How are we giving the best teachers in our classrooms opportunities to lead, coach, and develop and have real time and authority to do that work? So it's not prescriptive in saying there's only one way that this can look, but the framework is designed to give people a way to look at this differently, and then think about what this would look like in their school. It kind of goes back to the conversation we had about at the beginning about how diverse Texas is. The what is going to look a little bit different in different places, but I think the framework should give you some insight into the how. So, and I think the why this now is if we look at what's going on with the teaching profession and the level of support that folks need, this is the moment to think, how do we think differently about how we coach and develop new teachers? How do we think differently in a world of limited resources, both financial, and people, about how we make the most of the people that we have? And just because we've always done it a certain way doesn't mean that that's the way that we have to always do it.
I love this model what you're doing and what your focus is. So tell me who you're wanting to read your book. Who's your target audience? Who are you thinking about?
So there's three basic audiences and then, probably a bunch of bystanders. But I mean, I always for me, the people I thought about as I wrote the book are, practitioners. The primary goal is for this to be helpful to people doing what I believe is the most important work in our society. And so there's kind of 3 categories there. The book is oriented towards district leaders because I would argue to make some of these changes in how we share leadership in a school will require the support, the investment, and champions at central office. And so there is a charge to them to say, how can you create opportunities and support your campuses to think differently about this? And you have to play a leading role in that. The second audience will be principals and sitting leaders in positions of authority in schools, because they will have a lot of opportunity and influence to think about how they can move and improve the leadership model in their school. And then the third audience is sort of everyone, because the second half of the book, the first half of the book is really about kind of the structure that we've been talking about. The second half of the book is really trying to break down, if you're an aspiring leader, and I don't use the word administrator on purpose. I mean, I think we need to be thinking more about opportunities for teachers to lead without becoming an administrator. And so intentionally say, if you're an aspiring leader, not necessarily just if you're an aspiring administrator, what will be those next leadership challenges and how can you start getting ready for them? And then when you get that opportunity, how can you build the skills? How can you change how you spend your time? And how can you evolve your professional identity to succeed? So my hope is all those folks will find the book to be a supportive resource to them, and then the bystanders are the rest of us who kind of sit outside of schools and districts and are trying to be helpful, and hopefully there will be lessons that those audiences can learn and apply to their work as well.
Thanks so much for answering that. So important for all those audiences to partake of your words and thoughts, because it is very much hits home. Lindsay, where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn?
Yeah, well, you can certainly find a lot of information both about our work and the book at holdsworthcenter.org. The book, A New School Leadership Architecture, is available through the Corwin website. I mean, it's also on Amazon and other places. And then, our organization has a variety of social media channels where you can follow us as well.
Very cool. And I'll put that information in the show notes so it makes it easy for our guests to find your book. So good stuff. So I got one last question for you before we leave. And it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Yeah, I love this question. And I was lucky to have so many teachers who made a positive difference in my life. And frankly, I think if you ask most people, that's true for all of them. And it's a reminder of just the magic of what teachers do. The person who stands out is my fifth grade teacher, Miss Francis. And she has passed away. So she won't hear this, but she was someone who, it was a really pivotal year in my life. And honestly, I mean, she was a great teacher. I learned a lot, but also she just made me feel really valued at a time, where I wasn't really sure where I fit in with other students. And I actually, in my fifth grade year, that was the year I decided I wanted to be a teacher. I started kind of mentoring, tutoring another student, and she was just so flexible in responding to that and giving opportunities that were personalized to me. And that made me really feel like she recognized and valued and appreciated who I was. And I mentioned that she has passed away, but she was somebody who stayed in touch with me, all through my life. Every time something positive happened for me, I would get a note from her in the mail. So she's someone who comes top of mind, but there are just dozens, of people. And so I think the thing I just want to say is thank you to all of the folks across the country who dedicate themselves to that work. I think sometimes you get to see the impact that you've made, but I know that there are many students who've walked away from your classroom and their lives are different. So appreciate the teachers who dedicate themselves to that work every day.
Thank you so much. That's powerful, and that's cool that you can think about and recall the neat stuff that they had the impact. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think about that myself, and it's where I came up with the question, because it's something that there's certain ones that I never really thought about in those days, how much of an impact they were having. But down the road I did, and it was like, my goodness. And but Lindsay, thank you so much for talking with us about the Holdsworth Center and your book, A New School Leadership Architecture, a 4-level framework for reimagining roles. You challenge us to rethink what leadership and working and the idea of working together in schools, what it should look like, and what an incredible focus. Greatly appreciate it. So much to think about. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.